Chapter 1. The Vale of Ashes. The banners of victory still fluttered above the gates of Deiros Keep, their crimson cloth snapping in the autumn wind. Trumpets blared, hooves thundered on cobblestones, and the air rang with the roar of thousands of voices. The king's army had returned triumphant after months of brutal war. But Lady Alara watched from the shadows. She stood beneath a stone archway in the castle courtyard, half hidden by ivy and cold pillars, while the crowd pressed forward, eager for a glimpse of their champions. She lingered apart, as she always did. A veil of pale silk covered her face, pinned beneath her hood, trailing softly down her shoulders. To the people of the court, she was little more than a ghost, whispered about, pitied, sometimes mocked. She had not always been so. Once, Lady Alara of House Deiros had been spoken of as the jewel of the court, bright, graceful, with laughter that turned heads at feasts. But the fire had taken that from her. It had stolen her family's hall, her father, her mother, and the smooth beauty of her face and arms. Flames had carved cruel marks into her skin, and though she lived, she had never again been the woman she once was. The veil was her shield, her silence, her armor, and so, while the city roared its welcome to the returning army, she remained hidden in shadow, clutching the folds of her cloak. The sound of steel striking stone drew her gaze. Soldiers marched in formation through the gates, battered yet proud, their banners high. At their head rode General Kaelan Vayner, the king's chosen commander, feared by enemies and respected by every man who followed him. Alara's breath caught. He was not adorned in gilded armor like the court knights, but in blackened plate scarred by battle. His shoulders were broad, his bearing unyielding. His hair, dark as raven's wing, was tied back, and his face was carved in lines of grim resolve. He looked less like a man than a weapon honed by war. The crowd adored him. Maidens tossed flowers into his path. Men cheered his name, yet Kaelan did not bask in their adoration. His eyes swept over the people with the wariness of one who expected betrayal at every corner. He did not smile, he did not wave. He rode as though already weary of victory, and then his gaze found hers. For a heartbeat, Alara could not move. Most men, upon seeing her veil, looked away with discomfort or curiosity, quickly masked as pity. Some whispered cruel jokes, but Kaelan's eyes did not waver. His stare was steady, piercing, as if the silk between them did not exist. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, before a herald stepped forward and drew Kaelan's attention to the king. He dismounted, bowed, and handed over his sword in the ritual of return. Yet even as he walked to the dais, Alara felt the weight of his glance lingering on her. That night the great hall blazed with torchlight. The victory feast was a sea of voices, laughter, and music. Nobles, draped in jewels and silks, raised goblets of wine, competing to be heard, while minstrels strummed songs of glory. Servants darted between tables, arms laden with roasted pheasant, spiced venison, and golden bread. Alara sat in her accustomed place at the far edge, half concealed behind a pillar. She preferred it so. It allowed her to fade into silence, unnoticed by those who would judge or pity her. But when General Kaelan entered the hall, she saw at once that he was different. Others craned their necks to see him, whispered of his campaigns, or angled themselves in his path. Noble daughters fanned their faces, daring him to glance their way, yet his gaze skimmed past them, searching, restless, until it landed once more on her. Alara's pulse quickened. The steward, surprised, announced her name when Kaelin approached. Lady Alara of House Dairos. His tone carried confusion. Why should the great general notice a veiled woman hidden at the edge of celebration? Kaelin bowed, not with the lazy mockery many nobles gave her, but with exact courtesy, as though she were queen. "My lady," he said, his voice low and roughened by years of command. "Forgive my intrusion. I wish to meet you." Her throat tightened. No man had sought her out in years. "I am of little consequence, my lord," she murmured, lowering her gaze. "Surely there are others more fitting for your notice." Kaelin's lips curved faintly, though it was not quite a smile. "So they tell me, yet I have heard whispers that Lady Alara of Dairos is a woman of sharp counsel, and that her silence speaks more wisely than most men's speeches." Her breath caught. He knew. Somehow he knew she was more than the broken ornament court gossip claimed. "You must have mistaken me," she said, her voice unsteady. "I am but a shadow now." Kaelin's gaze held hers, steady as steel. "Even shadows have power, my lady. I, of all men, should know." The words struck her like an oath. For the first time since the fire had scarred her life, Alara felt seen, not as a hushed tragedy, not as a veiled spectre, but as herself. And though the hall rang with music and laughter, though torches flared and goblets clinked, the world narrowed to the space between them, to the weight of his eyes and the whisper of his words. In that moment, Alara knew something had shifted. The veil had protected her for so long, but the general's gaze promised it would not protect her forever. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Courtyard. The bells of Dairos Keep tolled in the distance, their iron voices rolling across the morning mist. Sunlight spilled pale and cold over the castle stones, illuminating courtyards alive with activity. Servants hurried with baskets of linens, scribes carried scrolls pressed tight to their chests, and soldiers, still restless after months of campaign, shouted drills as their boots struck in unison. Yet among the clamor, Lady Alara moved quietly through the cloisters. Her steps were measured, the faint whisper of silk veil trailing after her. The stone archways were cool with shade, ivy climbing high upon them, and in the stillness she felt, for once, unseen. She carried a leather-bound ledger, pages heavy with numbers and debts, the household's lifeblood. Her brother, Lord Brenneth, should have tended such matters, but Brenneth was too often found among dice and cups of wine, careless of his duties. Alara, though bound by silence and scars, kept her family's crumbling estate from collapse with steady quill and sharper mind. The tip of her quill scratched across parchment. She paused, ink pooling. For a heartbeat her hand trembled, memory striking her like a blade. The roar of the fire, the timbers collapsing, the scream she could not forget. Heat seared phantom across her cheek, though years had passed. She pressed her fingers against the silk veil, grounding herself until her breath steadied once more. Lady Alara. The voice was low, carrying the weight of command, yet softer than she expected. She turned, startled. General Kaelin Vayner stood in the archway. He wore no gleaming armor now, only a dark tunic belted at his waist. Though even stripped of steel, he seemed hewn of iron. Broad shoulders filled the frame of the doorway, his gaze sharp as a drawn sword. Her quill slipped from her hand, rolling across the ledger, ink bleeding where it fell. "My lord," she murmured, gathering herself, though her pulse quickened. "I did not hear you approach." Cailan stepped forward, sunlight spilling over him as he crossed the threshold. His presence filled the cloister with a tension she could not name. "I did not mean to startle you," he said. "I was told I might find you here." A flicker of unease passed through her. "Here, among ledgers and dust, most men avoid me, as if shadows might cling." His lips curved, faint, almost imperceptible. "I am not most men." Alara's fingers tightened on the edge of her book. She should have dismissed him, made polite excuse, and withdrawn. Yet something in his voice, direct, unadorned, held her. "Why seek me at all, General?" she asked at last, keeping her tone carefully even. Cailan studied her for a moment, then spoke low, as if the very ivy-draped walls might carry their words away. "Because I hear things, rumors, that when Deiros was under siege, it was not Lord Brenneth who secured safe passage for the villagers. It was his sister." The breath left her lungs. Her veil stirred with the sudden force of it. No one was meant to know. That night had been buried in silence. The desperate bargain she had struck with enemy captains, her voice hoarse with smoke as she pleaded for the innocents to be spared. She had stood trembling yet unbroken before men who laughed at her scars, demanding they honor the old codes of mercy. She had succeeded, but she had spoken of it to no one. "You have been misled," she whispered, though her voice shook. Cailan's eyes narrowed, unflinching. "No, I have spoken to men who lived because of you. Do not deny what I already know." The air between them tightened. Her hand trembled upon the ledger, ink staining her fingertips. She turned her face aside, as though the veil were not barrier enough. "I am no heroine, General. I did what I must." "And I," he said, stepping closer, "do not mistake necessity for weakness. It takes courage to face fire unarmed." His words struck her harder than any cruel whisper she had endured. Her throat ached, but before she could shape a reply, hurried footsteps echoed in the cloister. A page, hardly more than a boy, came stumbling, cheeks flushed. He bowed awkwardly, clutching a folded scrap of parchment. "My lady," he panted, "I was told to give this to you at once." Puzzled, Alara took the note, her heart already uneasy. No seal marked the fold, no name signed its edge. She opened it quickly, and her blood ran cold. Scrawled in hasty hand, the words were stark. "The wolf is in the flock. Beware the feast." Her fingers clenched around the parchment. Cailan's eyes caught the flicker of dread beneath her veil. "What message is that?" "It is nothing," she said quickly, tucking the note against her palm. "A jest, some cruel joke." "Do not lie to me," Cailan growled softly, his voice the tempered steel of command. He stepped nearer until his shadow fell across her. "I have faced men with knives at my throat who lied with steadier voices than yours. Tell me the truth, Lady Alara. Who is the wolf?" Her breath faltered. She should burn the note. She should remain silent, but his gaze, unyielding, piercing, held her fast. "There are whispers," she confessed at last, her voice low, trembling, "that not all within these walls are loyal, that rebellion still feeds upon treachery. And tonight, at the feast," her throat tightened, "I fear blood will be spilled For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then Kaelin reached out. Alara froze as his calloused hand closed gently around hers, the ink-stained one she kept half hidden from sight. Warmth pressed against her palm, steady and real. "Then you will not face this alone," he said. The words struck her like an oath, burning deeper than any scar. And though she wished to retreat, though fear clawed at her, Alara did not pull her hand away. For the first time in years, someone's touch did not feel like pity. It felt like promise. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. The autumn air bit sharper that evening. Lanterns glowed along the corridors of Deiros Keep, their golden light spilling over stone walls carved with age. The halls brimmed with voices preparing for the king's feast, but Lady Alara found herself wandering to the far gardens, where silence clung between withered rose bushes and fountains stilled for the season. She craved quiet. The warning note still lay hidden in the folds of her gown, its words like thorns pressing against her thoughts. "The wolf is in the flock. Beware the feast." Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the letters bleeding across her vision. Lady Alara. Her breath caught, she turned. Kaelin was there, as though shadows themselves had carried him. No armor, no retinue, only a cloak that shifted with the wind. "You seek solitude," he said, voice low. "And you disturb it," she replied, a faint quiver of humor slipping past her guarded tone. To her surprise, his mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. "So I do. Forgive me, but I could not let the matter rest." Her hand brushed the folds of her gown, where the note remained hidden. "You should," she said softly. "You would be safer if you did." "I have survived 20 years of battlefields," Kaelin said, stepping closer, his eyes catching the lamplight. "Do you think I fear whispers more than arrows?" She looked away, pulse unsteady. "Battlefields are simple. You see the enemy, you face them with steel. But in court," she gestured to the keep around them, "the enemy smiles across the table and toasts your health. Poison wears silk, and daggers hide in smiles. That is far deadlier than arrows." For a moment, silence. Then Kaelin inclined his head. "You speak truth." The night deepened. A hush settled between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken things. "Alara," Kaelin said at last, her name rolling off his tongue with quiet certainty. She stilled. Few dared call her so directly. "Why do you hide behind that veil, even when shadows are kind?" Her breath hitched. The instinct to recoil surged, to retreat behind practiced silence. Yet something in his tone, steady, unjudging, held her fast. "Because once I was beautiful," she whispered, her voice cracked like brittle glass. "And when the fire took that from me, so too did it take every glance of affection, every kind word that was not laced with pity. The veil spares others from discomfort, and spares me from seeing it in their eyes." She drew her cloak tighter, trembling. "I cannot bear it, General, to see men wince when they look at me, or women whisper when I pass. The veil makes me faceless, and faceless, at least, I am safe." Kaelin's gaze did not waver. Slowly, deliberately, he said, "You believe scars make you less. I tell you, they make you more." Her throat tightened painfully. "Do not mock me." "I mock no one," he said, his voice like forged steel. Scars are proof of survival, proof you endured what others could not. On the battlefield, men carve songs into their flesh, every wound a mark of honor. Why should yours be shame? Elara's hands trembled at her sides. The truth of his words struck deep, yet years of scorn and whispers coiled around her heart like chains. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. You speak as a soldier, but soldiers return to cheering crowds. I returned from fire to silence. Kalen stepped closer, the brush of his cloak against her arm. His voice dropped, low and rough with memory. And I returned from war to nothing. She turned sharply. His gaze was distant, fixed on some place far beyond the garden walls. I was born in a village that no longer exists, he said. The invaders burned it to ash when I was 10. I rose from mud and hunger, not noble blood. Every step into this keep, every salute, every title, I earned with steel, not birthright. Yet still the lords look at me and see a brute, a mongrel unfit to sit at their table. Victory wins no love, only fear. For the first time, Elara saw him not as a figure of iron, but as a man carved by hardship, carrying his own scars, though invisible to the eye. You, she faltered, you know what it is, then, to be judged not for who you are, but for what others choose to see. Kalen's eyes locked with hers. Yes, that is why I see you. The words rang in her chest like a bell struck deep. She had no answer, only silence. The garden around them seemed to fade. The chill night air whispered through the withered roses, yet she felt warmth rise within her. For the first time since fire had stolen her world, she felt not pitied, not judged, seen, but the moment fractured with the clang of distant bells. The king's feast. Kalen straightened, soldiers' resolve hardening over the softness that had flickered through his voice. The warning, he said. It was for tonight. Elara's pulse raced. She clutched the folds of her gown where the note still lay hidden. Yes, she whispered, tonight. And as the bells tolled again, echoing through the keep like the striking of doom, both knew the night would not end without blood. Chapter 4. The Mask and the Sword. The great hall of Dairos Keep blazed with splendor that evening. Chandeliers of wrought iron hung heavy with candles, their light scattering over gilded banners, and long tables piled with roast venison, spiced fruits, and goblets of dark wine. The nobility had gathered in all their finery, a tide of silks, jewels, and whispers. At the high table sat King Aldrich, his laughter loud, though his eyes carried the weight of a man who trusted no one. Flanking him were lords fattened on ambition, ladies shimmering with hidden malice, and courtiers skilled in weaving flattery like snares. Lady Elara sat lower, near the fringes of nobility, her veil drawn close. She kept her gaze lowered, but her pulse hammered with each clatter of a goblet, each rustle of silk. The warning pressed against her thoughts. The wolf is in the flock. Beware the feast. Across the hall, General Kalen stood near a column, one hand resting casually upon the hilt of his sword. To the court he looked like nothing more than the king's war-hound at ease. But his eyes never rested. They roamed the room, marking shadows, measuring glances, watching every hand that strayed too near a goblet. The feast began with revelry. Wine spilled freely, and the music of lutes and flutes danced beneath the vaulted ceiling. Yet to Elara, each note sounded sharp, each laugh too brittle, each smile too sharp. Then she saw it, a servant weaving through the tables, bearing a tray of golden goblets. His movements were too swift, too focused, and when he paused at the king's side, Alara caught the faintest glimpse of powder dissolving into the wine. Her breath caught, her hand clutched the tablecloth. Poison. Alara? The lady beside her frowned at her sudden stillness, but Alara did not answer. She rose, hands trembling, the veil fluttering as she moved. My king. She tried to speak above the music, her voice drowned beneath the laughter and song. She rushed forward, too quickly. A hand reached to stop her, but the silken threads of her veil snagged against a jeweled clasp. The fabric tore away. A gasp rippled through the hall. The music faltered, then stilled entirely. Her scars blazed in the candlelight, raw, twisted lines along her cheek, the burned flesh that fire had stolen from her youth. Faces turned, whispers hissed. Some recoiled as if from a wound, others smirked with cruel delight. Alara froze, her secret, her shield, her only armor, stripped away in an instant. Then a voice, strong as steel, cut through the silence. Enough! Cailan. He strode forward, his cloak sweeping behind him, eyes blazing with fury. Not at her, but at them. He planted himself before her, a wall of iron between Alara and the court's stairs. You dare shame her? His voice thundered across the hall. While poison seeps into the king's cup? All eyes snapped to him. Cailan's hand shot forward, striking the goblet from the servant's tray just as the man reached the king. The wine splashed across the dais, dark and bitter, and where it struck polished silver, the metal blackened. Gasps erupted, cries of alarm filled the hall. The servant drew a dagger, lunging not for the king, but for Alara, his true mark. Steel sang. Cailan's blade was already drawn, flashing in the candlelight. With one swift strike, the assassin's weapon clattered across the floor. In another breath, the man lay sprawled, Cailan's boot on his chest, the tip of his sword pressing to his throat. The hall dissolved into chaos. Guards rushed forward, nobles shrieked. The king barked orders, but Cailan's gaze remained fixed on Alara. Not pity, not horror, only steadiness. You are not alone, he murmured, low enough only she could hear. Her breath trembled, her scarred face burned under the scrutiny of the court. Yet for the first time she did not lower her gaze, because his eyes, unyielding, unashamed, were fixed on hers, and in that moment something shifted. The mask she had worn for years lay in tatters at her feet, but beside her stood the sword who would not let her fall. Chapter 5. The Kiss of Oaths. The corridors of Dairos Keep were hushed that night, yet they carried whispers of all that had unfolded in the great hall. Nobles spoke in sharp, cutting tones of the unveiled lady and the general's defiance. Servants hurried with lowered eyes, their steps too quick, as though fearing to be caught in the storm that brewed behind every door. Within her chambers, Lady Alara sat motionless before the mirror. The veil that once hid her face lay crumpled on the floor, forgotten. Candlelight wavered across the scarred half of her reflection, revealing ridges and shadows she had spent years concealing. Her fingers traced the marred skin. Trembling, she thought of the gasps, the widened eyes, the cruel laughter hastily smothered by wine goblets. She thought of the shame that had burned her alive long before fire ever touched her. And yet, above it all, she thought of him, the way General Cailan had stepped forward, steel drawn, voice like thunder silencing the hall. The way his eyes had not faltered, not even for a breath, when her scars were revealed. No revulsion, no pity, only fury, fury for those who dared to shame her. A knock stirred her from her thoughts, firm, measured, a soldier's knock. "Elara," came the voice, his voice. Her chest tightened. She turned her face away from the door instinctively, though there was no veil to hide behind. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her words carried no strength. The door opened anyway. Kalen entered, his armor set aside, his dark tunic lending him a more human shape than the fearsome figure of the hall. His sword was at his hip still, but it was his eyes she felt most keenly, steady, unwavering, fixed upon her, as though he saw no one else in all the keep. "I had to see you," he said simply, closing the door behind him. Elara rose too quickly, her chair scraping. She turned her face toward the shadows, hand instinctively brushing at her hair to cover what could not be covered. "You've seen enough," she said bitterly, "more than anyone was ever meant to." Silence stretched, then footsteps, his, slow, deliberate, until he stood mere steps away. "Elara!" His voice was low, not the booming command of the battlefield, but a gentleness she did not know he carried. She shook her head, her throat tight. "Don't look at me like this." But he did. He did not look away. Instead, Kalen reached out, not to her face, not to the scars she hated, but to her hands. Rough, calloused fingers brushed hers, then closed around them gently, as though they were a sacred oath he dared not break. Her breath hitched. Her instinct was to pull back, to hide, but the warmth of his grip anchored her. "I swore to guard the king," he murmured, "but tonight I found another vow written upon my heart." Her lips parted. She could not speak. "You think your scars are chains?" Kalen continued, his gaze burning into hers. "But when I look at them, I see survival. Fire tried to claim you, and yet you stand before me, stronger than any courtier who hides behind silks and jewels. You shame no one, Elara. You humble them." Tears stung her eyes, hot and sharp. She shook her head, unable to bear the weight of such words. "You speak as though you do not see what is before you." "I see everything." His thumb brushed against her hand, rough skin against soft. "And I would not change a thing." The room trembled with silence, heavy with words unsaid. Elara's heart pounded. Something within her, long buried beneath layers of shame, stirred and reached for him. For the first time, she let herself meet his gaze fully, without veil, without mask, and in his eyes she saw no flinch, no horror, only the steady, unwavering fire of a man who had chosen. Her lips parted, the words trembling on her tongue. "Kalen, I—" The door burst open. A young soldier stumbled in, his face pale, his voice shaking. "General, forgive me, but the border flames with rebellion. Lord Vaynar has risen. His banners march on the eastern road." The moment shattered like glass. Kalen's jaw tightened. His hand squeezed hers once more, fiercely, as though he could pour unspoken words into that single touch. Then he released her, his shoulders squaring into the soldier once more. "The general the kingdom demanded. Ready the men," he ordered, his voice hard as iron. "I ride within the hour." The soldier fled, the door closing behind him, and for a heartbeat, only a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Kalen turned back to Elara, his eyes still fierce, still hers. "This is not finished," he said softly. "Not until I speak what I must. Not until you hear it." Then he was gone, leaving Alara standing in silence, her hands still trembling where his touch lingered, her heart torn between dread of war and the fragile bloom of hope that had just begun to grow. Chapter 6: Fire and Betrayal. The kingdom of Deiros trembled beneath the pounding of war drums. Word spread like wildfire. Lord Vanar, once the king's loyal bannerman, had raised his standard in rebellion. His army, swollen with discontented knights and mercenaries, marched upon the capital with fire at their backs. The streets of the city were a frenzy, merchants shuttering stalls, mothers clutching children, soldiers rushing to their stations, and in the heart of it all, General Kaelin stood armored in black steel, his sword gleaming at his side, a war-horse stamping beneath him. Before the gates he found her. Alara stood at the edge of the courtyard, her veil forgotten, her eyes wide with dread and something fiercer still. She had begged herself not to come, not to make this farewell harder than it must be, but her heart had dragged her to him. Kaelin dismounted, stepping close enough that the crowd's noise dimmed to a hum. "I ride east," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. "We will drive them back before their smoke touches the walls." Her throat tightened. She wanted to beg him not to go, to curse the gods who demanded men like him be thrown into fire again and again. Instead, she whispered, "And if you do not return?" He reached out, hesitant at first, then firm, taking her hand, gauntlet cool against her skin. "I will return," he said, voice like an oath sworn before the heavens. "On my life, Alara, I will come back to you." The words struck her like a blade wrapped in silk. She could not answer. She only held his gaze, and in that silence, a promise deeper than any spoken passed between them. Then he was gone, mounting his horse and leading the column east, banners snapping in the wind. For 2 nights, Alara endured the restless silence of the keep. Courtiers whispered in the corridors, some praying for victory, others sharpening schemes upon the edge of war. On the 3rd night, she overheard it. Passing by the solar, she caught fragments of a hushed conversation, voices she knew too well. "Kaelin will not see the dawn. The rebels lie in wait by the Blackwood Pass, and when he falls, so too does the king's shield. Vanar will strike the capital unguarded." Her breath turned to ice. She pressed closer, the scarred side of her face against the cold stone, straining to hear. The second voice spoke, a voice that cut her deeper than any blade. It was her cousin, Lord Reynold, blood of her blood. "He will not suspect me," Reynold said smoothly. "Kaelin trusts too easily. By dawn, the general will be dead, and with him gone, the king has no sword to wield." Alara staggered back, heart hammering. Betrayal, her own house conspiring with the rebels. For a moment, despair nearly crushed her. She was no soldier, no warrior. What could she do against men who plotted with daggers in the dark? Then she thought of Kaelin's words, "I will return, on my life, Alara," and she knew she could not remain silent. That night, she took a horse from the royal stables. She wore no veil. The wind tangled her hair, the cold bit her skin, and fear clawed at her throat. But she rode east into the darkness, her heart a drum of fire, each hoof beat a prayer that she was not too late. The Blackwood Pass loomed, shrouded in mist and moonlight. The rebels lay hidden among the crags, crossbows drawn, blades ready, and down the winding path rode Kaelin and his men, their banners proud in the night. Ilara's breath tore from her lungs as she urged her horse faster. "Kaelin," she screamed, her voice raw. He turned, shock flashing in his eyes. Then his gaze swept upward, catching the glint of steel in the cliffs. "Ambush!" he roared. Arrows hissed through the air like serpents. Shields rose, men cried out. The clash of steel rang through the pass as rebels poured from the shadows. Kaelin's sword sang, cutting through foes with grim fury. Yet the tide pressed hard, and he knew the trap was set too well, until Ilara charged into the fray. She had no blade, no armor, only the desperate courage of a heart that would not let him fall. She threw herself against a rebel who had drawn aim on Kaelin's back, the arrow veering wide as she crashed into him. A dagger flashed, pain seared white-hot across her side. "Ilara!" Kaelin's roar split the night. He cut down the rebel in a single stroke, catching her as she fell, crimson blooming against her gown. Her breath came ragged, yet she forced her eyes open to meet his. "I could not let them take you." Kaelin pressed her to him, his blade still dripping as he fought one-handed, fury and terror warring in his eyes. "By all the gods, do not leave me, Ilara. Not now." The rebels faltered as the king's soldiers rallied, Kaelin's fury driving them back. The pass ran red with blood, the night shattering with cries until at last silence fell, broken only by the moan of the wounded. But Kaelin knelt in the midst of it all, cradling her against him, his hand pressed to her wound, his voice hoarse with anguish. "You saved me," he whispered, forehead against hers. "But if you die, Ilara, what worth is my life then?" Her lips curved faintly, even through the pain. "I told you once, you should not look at me." And still he did, not with pity, not with fear, but with the fierce, unyielding love of a man who had already chosen. Chapter 7: Scars and Vows. Smoke still lingered over the Blackwood Pass when Kaelin lifted Ilara into his arms. The battle had ended, rebels scattered into the night, yet to him nothing existed but the woman bleeding against his chest. He barked orders to his captains, his voice sharper than steel. "Secure the pass. Hunt down the stragglers. Leave none who raised a blade against the crown." But when his gaze fell to Ilara's pale face, his fury gave way to fear. Fear like he had never known, not in the bloodiest campaigns, not in the shadow of death. He mounted with her, cradled before him, urging his horse hard toward the capital. Every hoofbeat thundered with one desperate prayer: "Hold on, don't leave me." Days later, the rebellion lay in ruins. Lord Vaynar's banners had burned, his men broken against the king's wrath. Yet none of it touched Kaelin. Victory meant nothing if she did not open her eyes. In her chamber at Dairos Keep, Ilara stirred. Pain lanced through her side, but the weight of slumber finally lifted. She blinked against the dim glow of candlelight and saw him. Kaelin sat at her bedside, armor cast aside, tunic torn and stained from days of war. His hand enclosed hers, his head bowed, as though in prayer or torment. Her lips parted, her voice no stronger than a whisper. "Kaelin!" His head snapped up. Relief broke over his face like dawn after storm. "Ilara!" His hand tightened around hers, trembling despite all the steadiness he showed the world. "You woke." She tried to smile, though the effort cost her. "You kept your promise. You returned." He gave a short, broken laugh, the sound heavy with all he had held back. "I swore I would, and yet you nearly left me to walk this world alone." Her eyes softened, though shame quickly shadowed them. She turned her face slightly, the candlelight falling across her scars. You deserve more than a woman half broken. Had I not carried these marks, perhaps. Stop, his voice cut through, low and fierce. She blinked, startled. Kalen leaned closer, his eyes burning into hers. Do you know what I see when I look at you? Not ruin, not shame. I see every battle you fought alone. I see a woman who survived when fire tried to claim her, who carried her pain with grace that would break lesser souls. Her breath trembled. She wanted to believe, but the years of whispers, the weight of veils and shadows clung to her. Kalen, you cannot. He caught her hand, raising it to his lips. His mouth brushed the scarred skin gently, reverently. I can, and I will, until you believe. Tears stung her eyes, spilling unbidden. Kalen's voice roughened, breaking past the shield of the general into the man beneath. Every scar you bear, Elara, I will honor. I swear it before gods and kings. I will kiss each one until you see yourself as I do, whole, fierce, and worthy of every vow I can give. Her heart broke open, raw and unguarded. For so long she had hidden, convinced her scars were chains, and yet here, with his lips upon them, they became something else entirely. Proof of her survival, proof of her strength. Slowly she lifted her hand, trembling fingers brushing his cheek. You make me believe, she whispered, even when I cannot myself. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing as though her hand were the only peace he had ever known. When he opened them again, his voice was steady. The rebellion is ended. The kingdom will heal, and so will you. With me, if you'll allow it. Her lips curved, fragile but true. With you. The bells of Deiros tolled the next morning, not for war, but for peace. Lord Vanar was dead. His treachery burned from the land. The king stood firm upon his throne once more, and whispers of Lady Elara began to change. No longer only the veiled lady. Now she was the woman who had ridden through fire to save the general. Yet within her chamber, away from the court and its noise, she was simply Elara, and in Kalen's arms, scars and all, she was no longer afraid. Chapter 8. The Veil Falls. The war was over, yet its echoes lingered. Deiros Keep had begun to heal, though its halls still bore the soot of rebellion and the whispers of courtly tongues. Those whispers followed Elara wherever she walked, the veiled lady, the scarred one, the woman who dared ride into battle, but she did not hide anymore. When the day came, she stood before her mirror for the last time, not to fasten a veil, but to lay it gently aside. Her gown was simple, ivory silk embroidered with threads of gold, but her face was bare. The scars shone in the morning. Light, not hidden, not softened, she traced them once with her fingertips, and for the first time, she did not flinch. Outside, the bells tolled, not in warning but in joy. The great hall was filled with nobles and courtiers, their jewels glittering as they waited to witness the union. Many came expecting spectacle. Kalen, the king's general, binding himself to some alliance, perhaps the daughter of a duke. But when Elara entered, walking alone down the aisle, their whispers stirred like wind across dry grass. No veil, does she dare? Bold after all, she heard them, every word, but her steps did not falter. At the altar stood Kalen, broad and steady, clad not in his war armor, but in a tunic of dark velvet, a sword still at his side, as if to remind the court that love, too, was something he would defend. When he saw her, his face broke into something the court had never seen from him. Not the general's grim mask, not the soldier's command, but the unguarded, radiant look of a man who had already given everything of himself and still found he had more to give. She reached him, her heart thrumming like a drum. For a breath, silence stretched. Every noble eye burned upon them. Every whisper waited to rise. Then Kaelan reached for her. He cupped her scarred cheek, steady and reverent, as though it were the most precious thing he had ever held. His lips brushed the first mark, soft and sure, then another and another. Slowly, deliberately, he kissed each scar before the entire court, leaving no part of her untouched by his vow. Gasps rippled, whispers stilled. A silence thick with awe fell over the hall. "Elara," he said, his voice ringing clear, not just for her, but for every soul who dared doubt. "These are not marks of shame. They are the proof of your courage, and before gods and men I swear to cherish them, because they are you, and you are my heart." Her tears fell freely now, but they were not born of sorrow. They were born of release, of the chains slipping away at last. "I am not whole," she whispered. "You are more," he answered, his forehead resting against hers. "You are everything." And then he kissed her lips, sealing their vows not with grandeur but with the quiet, unshakable truth of two souls choosing one another. That evening, the court still buzzed with disbelief, but no one dared sneer again, for they had seen the general, the king's unbreakable sword, bend only for her. They had seen scars turned into symbols of love so fierce it silenced kingdoms. In the quiet after the feast, Kaelan and Elara stood upon the ramparts, the wind cool upon their faces. She leaned into him, no veil between them, no mask. "You silenced them," she murmured. He kissed her temple, his arms strong around her. "No, love, you did." She smiled, closing her eyes as the stars spread above them. For the first time in her life she did not fear to be seen, and so the story did not end with a veil or a wound or a whisper. It ended with love that did not deny brokenness but cherished it, a love that turned scars into vows and whispers into silence, a love that endured.